Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome to Talking with Teachers. Today we have with us Dr. Zachary Wright. He is an Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs at Northwestern University in Qatar and Professor in Residence of History and Religious Studies in the Liberal Arts Program. Dr. Wright received his PhD in History from Northwestern University, his MA in Arabic Studies and Middle East History from the American University in Cairo, and his BA in History from Stanford University. He teaches classes on Islam in Africa, Islamic intellectual history, African history, and Middle East history. His research focuses on Islamic intellectual history in West and North Africa from the 15th century to the present. Most of Wright's field research has been conducted in Senegal and Morocco with Arabic, French, and Wolof language sources. He serves as the director of Northwestern University's Institute for the Study of Islamic Thought in Africa and faculty affiliate of Northwestern's program of African Studies and the Middle East and North Africa program. So I'd like to bring to the screen Dr. Zachary Wright. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
MashaAllah, it really is an opportunity, a great opportunity to have this honor to speak to you today. Well, rather honor to have this opportunity to speak to you today. I did it in reverse. I guess it's a bit of both of those things, right? An opportunity to have the honor and the honor to have this opportunity. I think the first time I actually encountered you was in Atlanta some years ago. We had a conference, and I believe it was one of the Tijani Sheikhs, one of the Sise Sheikh, I forget exactly who it was that you were accompanying to that particular program, and you actually translated for him. And I was really impressed with your translation. I was like, well, who's this Zachary Wright person, mashallah? You know, and of course, I still have a lot to catch up on. You know, I have a lot of things that you've written, but, you know, wanted to introduce you to our audience, and I think that you deserve a bit more attention, and so inshallah, it's as I said before, it's a great opportunity and a great honor to speak to you today.
Well, likewise, and I really appreciate what you're doing. I do remember our meeting in Atlanta, and I think I prayed Fajr behind you in the hotel. And yes, that was the Imam Sheikh Tijani Sisi.
Yeah, mashallah. Yeah, alhamdulillah. You know, so why don't you speak a little bit about yourself? You know, who's Zachary Wright? I mean, what sort of, how did you get yourself on this journey? Where you come from? And of course, how did you eventually become professor, among other things? Anything you like to offer about your family background, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, salatu wassalamu ala ashraf al-mursalin. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, well, I just have to begin, I guess, with conversion to Islam, because like as Salman al-Farsi said, my father is Islam and I don't have any. That's our honor, is just to be the servant of God. So alhamdulillah, I converted to Islam in 1997 at the feet of Sheikh Hassan Sisi in Medina Bay, Senegal. Before that, had been sort of meditating, kind of searching for Allah, but I didn't know what I was really looking for. I had a Hindu roommate, Sanjay, who had gone to India and started to meditate, and he came back and I said, you can teach me how to meditate. He said, okay, you need a mantra that has 2 syllables and end in a long vowel, and you'll just repeat this word over and over in your head, and you make it go slower and slower in a circle until you're just left with the word. And the word that I chose was Allah. So I started to meditate with the word Allah. And then very soon I was confronted with the reality that Allah is certainly the truth. He exists. But also I was, taking a bit of this religion and that one. And I remember getting frustrated at one point and then making sajda, because I had a friend, Sibir Muhammad from Atlanta, that was the first Muslim that I knew. At Stanford University, I was placed in the African American theme dorm as a white kid from New Hampshire. So, and I got that kind of exposure to Islam through the kind of Warth Deen community. But so I made sajda after having gone to the mosque with him, and as I knew that seemed to be the way to pray, and I just remember praying to Allah that to please guide me to the path that I should choose. And right after that, I got this undergraduate grant to go to Senegal. I didn't know where I was going, and I ended up in Medina Bay, Senegal. I was not a Muslim at that point, and I remember just meeting this incredibly luminous figure, and I'd sort of already thought before then that I wouldn't really become a religious person. I like to be kind of eclectic, but I just remember thinking like this person is a different way of being a human being, and just the presence of a consummate wali Allah that just throws you into the remembrance of Allah, whether you want to or not, and to show you the problems of your own nafs that you weren't wanting to see. So that's an amazing, of course, the karamat of being able to Allah, this the dua mustajab, Allah is answering his prayer for the rain, or him to be able to see into your heart and read you. So that was all amazing, but mostly just to kind of see what it was like to be in the presence of prophetic perfection. So beautiful. And so I ended up becoming a Muslim. After that, my mother, I took her to Senegal to meet Sheikh Hassan. She cried when she met him, and then became Muslim. And then my younger sister also after that became Muslim in Senegal also.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
But partially my journey onto academia was sort of going back to California at that time, finishing up my undergraduate degree. And I can't remember who in particular, but the sort of MSA seemed to be sort of dominated by Arab and Indo-Pak types at that time. And they were like, "Oh, you became Muslim in Africa. Like, are they really Muslims there?" And so I remember sort of wanting to know more about Islam in Africa from my own identity, my own path. And so that's how I started kind of like reading a lot more, particularly about the characterization of Sufism at that time, which had been mostly narrated out of the Sufism in West Africa, had been mostly narrated out of the colonial archive as something that was sort of, it was kind of like a Marxist perception of being the opiate of the masses and responsible for the infantile delusions of Negro Muslims, and so these were just preposterous ideas that conflicted with what I knew. So I wanted to kind of think more critically about who these people were, who I was now, as a part of this family. But but otherwise, I've been from. I grew up in New Hampshire. I was raised in a household that was sort of. They were my parents were kind of the back to the land hippies, where they raised us without electricity, vegetarians for a bit.
Okay.
And, so they were both from kind of affluent areas. My father was kind of from they always talked about their family lineage as being sort of descendant through John Adams and various Revolutionary War generals and things. And
mashallah. Okay.
So it was an old family in America, the Wright family, kind of in the Boston, Maine, New Hampshire area. But yeah, I mean, I appreciated the way I was raised to kind of be able to, one, it made it easier to go to Africa at that time in 1997. There was frequent blackouts and not a lot of air conditioning. And so it was kind of difficult to handle. But having grown up without electricity made it a little bit easier for me.
I'd imagine. SubhanAllah, it's a really pretty fascinating story. I mean, it's of course, I know it's more that you can add, but I wanted to reflect upon just a couple of things you said. So you said your early friend, your Hindu friend, so gave you some formula, and of course you chose Allah yourself. And I mean, so it sounds like you were in search of something different than what you were raised with. And were you struggling with atheism at any particular point, or was this just okay? You just didn't believe in. I'm assuming you were a Christian before that, and you just kind of gave it up. So you're just trying to look for something new.
Yeah, I would say more of like distraction and emptiness. I mean, things were ostensibly going well for me on the external world. I had nice friends that I liked, and I was doing the things that I wanted to do or imagined myself doing in college. But yeah, it was just a lack of an ability to find what I felt like was true serenity, I guess would be the answer. But in terms of, I was raised Christian, kind of a liberal Protestant denomination, the Congregationalist Church, which is now become the UCC, or Obama's denomination. And my older brother was ordained as a minister in that denomination, and is now a Unitarian minister. For me, I was raised, I think my mother had a big influence on me. She had a near-death experience in 1978, and giving birth to my sister, and it kind of had related to us this vision that she had, where she had left her body and gone up to this amazing light, and then she saw that the light was this complete peace there, and then she saw that the light was pointing her in the direction of these other guiding lights, and she was able to name that one was Jesus, and one was Moses, and one was maybe Buddha, but definitely one was Muhammad. And I remember her saying that in 1978.
La ilaha illallah, subhanallah.
Yeah. And so then she wanted to come back to her body, and she was told by this light that you can go back, but you have to bring your children to God. So that's when she started taking us to a kind of this Christian church, which I think for her at that time was the most kind of monotheistic church religious tradition she could find. But I remember her saying in the church services, they're saying that Jesus is the Son of God, but say he's a prophet, because that's what I know. That's when I became Muslim. I said, Mom, you're more of a Muslim than you are. What are you talking about?
Yeah. So before that moment with your friend, how did you know the name Allah? I mean, so you already had some knowledge of Islam prior to that particular moment?
Yeah. Well, I was majoring in history, so I was taking different classes about world history, and I had taken a class on Islam from a Jewish professor. I had taken some Arabic to kind of be cool. I liked the way that it was written, and then of course I had this friend also. So there was 3 friends I originally had in that African American dorm, and first was the Hindu Sanjay, and the second was the Black American Muslim Muhammad. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, mashallah. Yeah, and I often quote that as a famous quote from John Adams about the Constitution. How the Constitution was made for a religious and moral people. Without which it couldn't work. So as a really profound sort of quote that I like to repeat especially to non-Muslim Americans, because especially in light of current conditions and the constant attacks on Islam and Muslims, is that, well, you're not living up to your own heritage, your own legacy, right? So, and I think that one of the reasons that the Western world is out of whack as it is right now is because of the abandonment of God, the abandonment of Abrahamic morality, and so these are sort of like the, I guess you'd say, the death pains, or perhaps it's the pains of I guess you say a certain type of purge happening, maybe is leading people back to God, in the process, but that's really, mashallah, I know a relative of John Adams now, mashallah.
Well, yeah, I think he's also instructive for the tradition of kind of as you said, a sort of ethical Abrahamic monotheism, that in between where we're stuck right now in America seems to be, between a kind of atheistic left, and then say a Christian Zionist that has kind of become the tool of state power. And we're not really left with an earlier tradition of kind of critical monotheism. John Adams thought that the Trinity was a blasphemy. It didn't make sense. But he was a very strong believer in the one God, not like John.
Right. He's Unitarian, right? He's Unitarian, right? Yeah.
And it stood up strongly for ethical principles, including abolition at that time. But so I think there is this longer tradition, I think, that we have in America of a shared monotheistic ethical stance where we can collaborate on issues of justice and stand up for the truth. Yeah, I think
Right.
that's a good thing to be emphasizing. Yeah, in America
Right.
now. Yeah.
Right. So after your conversion, he says 1997, you convert to Islam, and I'm assuming that you start to study Arabic and Quran, those type of things. I mean, what sort of classical training have you had? Because I know you know
Yeah.
Arabic. I know you know Arabic. I know that.
Yeah, well, first I, studied with at the feet of Sheikh Hassan and some of his students. I know you had Imam Kafani Ibrahim already. He was one of my earlier
Yes.
teachers, and other teachers there. And with Sheikh Hassan, he would teach hadith. We would learn from him the basics of the fiqh tradition. At later stages, we would study when I was in. I studied for a year. I studied for 2 years in Egypt and then a year in Morocco. And I remember in Morocco, I was studying with a Shazali teacher who was a great fan of the Kitab al-Hikam of Ibn Atala al-Iskandari. So he would have us memorize some of the aphorisms من علامة الإتمام على العمل نقصا رجاء الوجود والزلل. Just as a way to learn the language. And when I would go to Senegal often during that time, and then Sheikh Hassan would get excited and he would take us out to this farm and teach us from Kitab al-Hikam. So yeah, I would say very special. I was blessed to have special access to Sheikh Hassan. I've since benefited a lot from his spiritual successor and current Imam, Sheikh Tijani Tariqah, who is very much a specialist in hadith study from Azhar. He and Sheikh Hassan gave me ijazah in the traditional sciences. Yeah.
Mashallah. So have you memorized the Quran or anything like that? You have?
Yeah, no, I've tried, not all the way, but alhamdulillah, I have two boys that are Hafiz Quran. So
Mashallah.
I'm making it possible for them.
Allah protect them. Yeah, inshallah. Yeah. Sometimes you go to study for yourself, but your children, they're the ones that actually acquire what you came to acquire. So yeah, mashallah. Yeah. I like one of the things that also fascinated me about seeing you with Sheikh it wasn't I'm sorry, Sheikh Hassan Sisi, I know was the older
Sheikh Tijani.
Sheikh Tijani Sisi, right?
Yeah.
Is that I'm saying, okay, here we have this white guy, he's coming here with all these Africans, right? And he's translating for them. And considering now your lineage and then your intellectual pedigree, I can understand how you could this sort of happened, right? In the sense, of course, I'm not here trying to psychoanalyze you, right? But I always I was a bit amazed about it. I said I could see sincerity. In other words, that's the point I'm trying to say. It was like, well, here you have an individual he's a white man, but he's actually serving Africans, right? And you talk about breaking the nafs, right? And and think about the other way too. Like sometimes you come across some blacks, African Americans who actually take people who would consider to be white as their sheikh in tariqah, right? Of course, there's a trend of actually trying to find someone who actually shares your assumed racial background. Like I know a lot of African American brothers who, especially like in the Atlanta area, who who they're Tijani, right? And the impression I get with some of them is that, okay, well, I'm a Tijani because Sheikh Ahmed Tijani was African, so I need to associate myself, reconnect myself with my historical tradition, my forgotten tradition, and I can definitely relate to that. But at a certain point, I think that it doesn't or shouldn't matter so much. And I can see that he both in of course Sheikh Ibrahim Niaz and some of his writings, you can see it. Although of course you have to say something about your people, right? And acknowledge what the history of things that happen to your people. But at a certain point, you feel that people are expected to so much transcend that, so like I said, so very early, like I said, when I saw you, and I was like, okay, well, I never seen him before. I don't know who he is. Look him up. So now I'm I'm listening to your translation. I said, "There's a really superb translation." I know you wrote it out, but you were reading it. But I found it to be really superb translation. And but I just wanted to mention that, and I just really was drawn to what appeared to be like a sign of sincerity in you. But after hearing your story now about John Adams and then your mother and things like that, I said, okay, mashallah, okay, I can see what happened there.
Yeah, but I was, it's been my great honor of my life to know and serve Sheikh Hassan, Sheikh Tijani Sisi. Yeah, no, I thank you. I pray that I live up to that sincerity.
Inshallah.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I understand. I think the question is a good one about racial affinity on the spiritual path. I mean, or just kind of like, yeah, kind of understanding or a particular background where you can say, well, this person might understand where I'm coming from a bit more. And it was definitely true that Sheikh Hassan kind of made those specific overtures, as did Sheikh Ibrahim before him, to the African diaspora.
Yeah.
And I do think there was the kind of actualization of what Sherman Jackson was talking about the third resurrection, like being able to kind of connect to kind of real knowledge traditions from within the African American community. So I think that's a reality. I would never try to downplay that. But I just say that Sheikh Hassan was definitely like above race. Right?
Yeah.
But and the spiritual path is wherever a sheikh is or true spiritual guide is taking you, he's gonna let you understand the things that have made up your nafs,
right.
And then when you come to annihilation in the divine presence, you can then also then understand better the true reality of your condition.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah,
exactly.
and I do think like there were things. I think I was the first white person that Sheikh Hassan gave like tarbiyah to the spiritual training. And yeah, I mean, I do think there were things about growing up white in America that I had internalized that I had to confront as a part of spiritual purification. And I at the same time that the spiritual path, it doesn't really have anything to do with race. It also, if you think that you're gonna get to the divine presence without confronting
Yes.
the things that you have internalized by growing up in wherever you've grown up and the trauma that you're carrying or that your people are carrying because of various forms of oppression that they have committed, then you're also not going to truly be able to get beyond yourself. You're going to be sort of subtly inscribing a sickness into your spiritual path.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, subhanAllah. Yeah, it's really, there's so many challenges, of course. It's dunya. Yeah, I mean, it's dunya. And I definitely, Dr. Jackson's perspective is a little bit, different when it comes to the question of what is an authentic expression of Black American sort of Islam, So I don't think that he thinks of it as, okay, an adoption of African cultural sort of what it identified as sort of African cultural artifacts, I guess you would say, necessarily, right? But because Black American Islam being, I guess you say, a species of Black American religion overall, right, which had the protest element, even though he himself eventually he did say that when he some years after writing his original book that became the one that became popular about Islam and the Black American, where he had mentioned to me that I come to realize that even protest itself can be its own type of idol, right? So it's he become a little bit more withdrawn from like the community, the Muslim community, at least lately, but yeah, I do think that it's an interesting development to say the least, that a lot more we call sort of indigenous Black Americans, or as sort of the foundational Black Americans, is kind of the new term that people are utilizing, that they are adopting the Tijani Tariqah, or just Tariqahs in general, you know. So, and we know that the Salafi element in our community, you know, there's the old sort of traditional method people, that, you know, but it's good to see people still connected, trying to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, regardless of what it happens to be, as long as, of course, it's not making them destructive, as long as it's making their lives better. And I do think that that's really most important. Now, one thing also I wanted to shift to talk about was, you had made mention earlier, to, or it's kind of a slight, you know, sort of side point that you made about coming across, you know, organizations dominated by Arabs, and, you know, the sort of Desi or Pakistani, sort of Indian, you know, those from subcontinent, and historically it seems that most Muslims have inclined towards a particular, I guess you'd say, Arab, Persian sort of imperialist sort of approach to the spread of Islam, I guess you would say. In the sense, and what I mean by that is, you know, there still seems to be a major focus on statehood, right? The idea of, you know, establishing khilafah, physical khilafah, and that in itself, you know, being an essential part of establishing a good society, right? You know, whereas it seemed like a lot of the Africans were less inclined towards that. At least my read, you know, my limited understanding of African history. But like, for instance, take someone like Salim Suwari, right? So I just know a little bit about him, right? You know, who his approach to da'wah was, at least what is said about him, is that, you know, he had the idea that every human being comes to Allah in his own or her own time, right? You know, and sometimes active propagation of Islam could disrupt that process or slow it down, right? You know, so be a good person, people will see the goodness, see the light coming from you, and then eventually they'll gravitate towards you, and then eventually the light will come on inside them as well, right? Which is a really interesting sort of way. And then you think about a country like Senegal, for example, their very first president was a Christian, right? You know, so I think for 20 years he served as president, and the Muslims there didn't feel the obligation to overthrow him, right? But they lived under Christian rule, even though you have a majority Muslim population. Whereas if that were to happen in, like, for instance, the Middle East, there are probably elements in society who would have been calling for the overthrow of those particular governors, right? You know, so I have any thoughts about that. And I've spoken for a long time, you know, but I just wanted to
No,
see how you feel about this.
I think that's very observant.
Yeah.
And thanks for mentioning Al-Hajj Salim Sawari. Yeah, I would just say that, you know, West Africa like any place, has had a particular history through the experience of colonialism and decolonization. And I think that's, you know, just to kind of circle back to the reason why African Americans, or in others, myself included, are connecting to like Islam in West Africa. It's not so much about a cultural identity. It's about wanting to find the authentic bearers of the prophetic sunnah. And I think we all recognize that, yes, there are exceptions in the Middle East and the broader Muslim world, but by and large, colonial modernity broke the independence of the ulama, of the scholarly class, right? Yeah. Particularly by the confiscation of the awqaf. And every single imam that you're going to find in the Middle East, for the most part today, is a salaried functionary of this colonial modern state structure. So the ability to speak truth to power, the ability to articulate the essential purpose of Islamic learning, which is to make good servants of God, not good servants of the state, that is could have been lost. And in many places in the Muslim world today, your imams are no longer like the respected exemplars of the community. They're often just kind of functionaries. Sometimes they're driving the beat up cars and people look down on them in the Gulf, for example. And so what's happening in West Africa is that the scholarly class, because their financial independence was based in the land and not in institutions, when colonial modernity happened, and I'm using the word colonial modernity because I'm seeing a continuity between the post-colonial state, which is also trying to kind of use the same apparatus to kind of create citizenship, exploit citizens, have the same kind of relationship of the state to the citizenry that the colonial regime had before them. And in some places like Senegal, the state then cannot was not able to kind of destabilize the clerical authorities from their land, from their sources of income, from their followings. And so what you're seeing then is an ability to maintain the classical curriculum, the purpose of the clerical communities over centuries and into the modern times, where that really hasn't persisted in the same way. By and large, as I said, there are exceptions, but by and large, in other places of the Muslim world. So I think that's kind of what's special about Islam in West Africa. I don't think it's the only place, and there are other places in the periphery of the Muslim world where that's happening also. And as I said, there are internal peripheries where that's happening in places like Egypt and other places. But the fact remains that the Muslim scholarly class in West Africa are the rock stars of the society, right? People don't follow around football players and musicians, right? But they follow around scholars, right? And this narration that if you knew and I think this comes very, very early on in the Islamic textual tradition, if you knew the true value of a scholar, you would never let their feet touch the ground. And you feel that, right? When you like when my mother first met Sheikh Hassan Sisi, she said, well, now I feel like I'm sitting among the companions of Jesus, the way that they respect him.
SubhanAllah. Yeah, that's just really, really fascinating. Very good observation. Yeah, that on the part of your mother. Yeah, it's Senegal is like the political parties are Sufis and the different tariqas and things like that. And so what about that anyway? I mean, how would you characterize a Sufi tariqa or a Sufi order? And and in particular, what's distinct about the Tijani Tariqah? What's special about it that you would say attracted you to it, and perhaps attracts a lot of other people to it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think any Sufi path is just a methodology of self-purification and of connecting to the divine presence. So similar to when you have methodologies of understanding the Sharia, you call them the madhahib or the schools of law. Methodologies of actualizing ihsan or spiritual excellence, according to the hadith of Gabriel, have traditionally come to be known as Sufi orders. Doesn't mean that there can be Sufism without the Sufi orders, of course, just like there can be fiqh without the madhahib.
Yes.
But by and large, against the argument that they're Sufis for non-Sufis, Sufism for non-Sufis, by and large, the methodologies, the tradition, the kind of accumulated knowledge has crystallized in these historical developments of the Sufi orders. So they're like a safer bet, the same way that the madhahib are a safer bet if you want to really truly understand the fiqh tradition. So that being said, I mean, I think so. Yeah, here's my book on the Tijaniya, the last one. If you want to learn more, I can't help to answer this in a couple of minutes, but I'll just relate what Sheikh Tijani Sisi he said to an Arab person who said, why should I take the Tariqah? He said, what we want from the Tariqah Tijaniya is just to become better Muslims. So I always felt that when I took the Tariqah very soon after becoming Muslim, I just felt like it was the internal aspect of connecting one's heart to Allah when you're in the prayer. The Tijaniya is based upon the asking forgiveness from God, making salat al Nabi, and saying la ilaha illallah. So they say it's the first one is takhalli, or emptying yourself out from everything except from Allah. Then tahalli is the beautification of the self through the prayer upon the Prophet, and then saying la ilaha illallah is tajalli, or witnessing the manifestation of the divine presence. So the purpose of the tariqah then is to obtain ma'rifatullah, is to obtain proximity to God. If it has any distinction, I mean, I think these distinctions can be overstated. Any tariqah, they're going to say very wondrous things about their founders, and we should be in a position, as Shaykh Amjani said, like, praise be to Allah, we have never denied the claim of any wali Allah. So we would never want to compare or claim these are Allah's affairs.
Right,
But
right.
I think
Yeah.
in terms of practice, the tariqah, if it has a distinction, it's in obligating its followers to keep up the practice of the wird. So if you miss the daily dhikr that you're supposed to do, then you have to make it up. And Shaykh Majani said, you know, if you take this tariqah and then play with it, you're going to be afflicted with problems in your life.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So,
It's like the hadith of the story about the man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and told him that he loved him. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if you really love me, then you should take a chainmail for against poverty, because poverty comes quickly to those who love me, right? So subhanallah. There's these new like AI tools that have been created. There's one called recently I came across called Shake GPT. And so it's I think that our community, well, people overall have become too dependent on information, right? Or the idea that knowledge that's it's properly transmitted through books and through like Google searches and things like that. And after seeing this, and then not to really to knock the creators of these type of tools, but I tried to offer some counsel to people publicly to kind of as a reminder. I wanted to just read it like what I said, and I said tools like these can be very useful, but it takes a human being to ensure the accuracy of the information. The human being is meant to be a disciple of other human beings in order to learn how to be human. No book or technology can train you in moral virtue the way the human exemplar can. There would be no point in God sending human beings as messengers who embody his message if books and technologies were equal replacements for them. He would have simply had the messengers deliver the books, ask the people to read them, and ignore the fact that a person was chosen to deliver the message. So I wanted to, just get your thoughts on that. What do you think about that?
well, I think that's beautifully put.
Yeah.
I would just say for me that is really what motivated my first, my PhD dissertation was trying to explain how it was that you could learn in the presence of a sheikh with no words being exchanged, right?
Yes.
What was going on in that? And so I kind of thought about this process of internalization of knowledge and how that transforms the human condition beyond the limits of the corporal form, so that this presence of the actualized master can actually be doing things to you while you just sit there, right?
Yeah.
As then this is why, this is the narration that the best of all actions is to sit in the presence of a wali Allah, just to sit there. But definitely, the purpose of like knowledge after all is not to like know things, right? It's to transform yourself.
Yes.
To khalaq bi akhlaqillah, right? To become like a transformed divine, I don't want to say divine, but a transformed, elevated being, person, right? And Sheikh Ahmad Tijani, at one point, he says, for the person who has not obtained any semblance of this reality of like really knowing what it means to strike with the hand of Allah, or to hear with the hearing of Allah, or to see with the sight of Allah, for the person who hasn't obtained any bit of that, he's not a real human being. He's like a corpse with no life, because he's just now you're just like an animal, like you're not really being what you're supposed to be as the kind of latent potentiality of all of our human spirits. We have this thing. So this is what can be obtained in the presence of masters. It's not just the adab behind the text, which many people talk about. Yeah, that's important, right? Was the Prophet ﷺ, was he smiling when he said something? Was he not? Was his face stern? Like, we all need to know that outside of the text, and that's transferred from person to person. But there's something beyond that too, which is that ability to awaken the spirit, which no book can really do, right? It has to be awakened in this mirror of somebody that's enlightened, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, this is this is what I should be doing, right? And then all of the answers come into place. As Rumi says, all of the complaints of winter end when the spring comes. Right? You're right. End one by one, like they all end, right? All at once.
Yeah, totally. MashaAllah. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of, I guess you'd say, resentment in the hearts of course, people have been oppressed, and naturally understandable. And so blacks, and especially the sub-Saharan African, has been marginalized, for centuries, right, by different cultures. I mean, darker peoples, among others, right. And so one particular complaint I've come across in the past is it relates to just like Islamic scholarship, for example. And so some people say, okay, well, um, the African scholars, they really weren't as significant as those from, like, for instance, Persia, or from from Arab countries and things like that. So that's why we don't hear people quote some of the greats from from African history so often. On the other hand, others say, "Oh, it's nothing. It's just simply the reason why is because it's just racism. They don't like Africans." But we have African scholars who had just as much of contribution scholastically to the Islamic curriculum, and the archives themselves, as like a Persian or a Turk or like an Arab, for example, right? I mean, for me, I'm of course I'm very much into acknowledging like discrimination and things like that when it does happen. But in this particular question, I've actually found that most of the African scholars, at least those I've been able to gain access to, at least their works, most of the works seem to they center on like Sufism, and if it's a book on fiqh, it's usually very focuses on fundamentals of fiqh. Most of this not really going, and I'm talking about the sub-Saharan African scholars whose books I've been able to access. And I know a lot of things are still in manuscript form. I know that and understand that. Timbuktu and a lot of these sort of Sankore and this sort of institutes, and who are attempting to publish these things, do critical editions of a lot of these old works. But I just I'm at an age where I'm trying to grow beyond like grievance culture, right? And just try to be a person who benefits from people regardless of where they're from, even like non-Muslims. If I find a non-Muslim say something that's wise, I just share it, especially if it's something unique. It's something unique that if I came across a Muslim who said the same thing, I would share the Muslim, right? But sometimes non-Muslims have very unique things to say. So we're all Banu Adam. So I say, well, Allah has given wisdom to everybody. So what's been your experience? Because of course you have a better knowledge of the African tradition than I do. But how would you characterize it? Compared to the works of those from other parts of the Muslim world.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I sympathize with what you're saying somewhat. I mean, I do agree that, like, instead of fetishizing the alleged tons of manuscripts in Timbuktu, or saying so and so wrote 2 tons of poetry, like, let's see some of it, like, bring it forward, right? Let's all talk about it. And I think there's been a lot of that going on, especially with the kind of invocation of Timbuktu. And I think there's actually very few of us that are doing the work of bringing this stuff out, whether it's translations are hard, and let's face it, they don't get the same credit that like a monograph would get within academia, unfortunately.
Right.
They're often thankless work. So you have people like Talud Dawood is doing amazing stuff. He probably doesn't get the credit that he deserves for the work he's doing. Muhammad Sharif is doing amazing translation work, right? He should be a professor in my mind, right?
Yeah, I know.
So, and I remember even John Hunwick, whom I of course have differences with, but I don't think he would ever, despite his prolific translations of the Timbuktu tradition, I don't think he was ever promoted to full professor, because he didn't have the same kind of monograph credentials
that
they expected, right? So I would just say that, and then I would say that looking at textual evidence for a scholarly tradition is always misleading, and it's going to particularly underprivilege people that are not in major urban centers through lack of access to paper, time, scribes, etc. So I mean, Cairo was a really an amazing place. There's a reason why, you had so much textual wealth of knowledge coming out of that place. You had a city of 500,000 people. Look at the madrasas that were there. So, Karawin was special.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, Timbuktu was special also. But I mean, whether you're in the Middle East or in Sub-Saharan Africa, I think the rule proves that the greatest of scholars were the ones who never wrote anything.
Yes,
Or wrote
right.
Look at Abu Hassan al-Shazali, look at Sheikh Ahmad Tijani. They didn't write except for a few letters, really.
Yeah. Imam Abu Hanifa.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, yeah,
They
they have books
too
attributed to
involved.
him, but they say most of them are not,
Yeah.
authenticated. So yeah.
And even Jama'ah, the Syrian Shafi scholar from 13th century Damascus, he said the greatest calamities is taking texts instead of sheikhs.
Yeah,
so it's back to
right.
this Sanad tradition that's more important than the text. That being said, there is a lot of amazing wisdom in the West African textual tradition that we're only beginning to bring to light. So I think there are incredible histories. This is my latest book, which maybe I'll talk about later, but this is a co-author piece. So this is a new translation of one of the major Timbuktu chronicles. That's a really fascinating history, and I think it ranks with like Abdurrahman al-Jabarti's work, for example, even though it's of an earlier period. And then there's amazing kind of theosophical Sufism, talking about the cosmological presences, commenting on what Ibn Arabi said. This would be by Don Taffa, I think the nephew of Usman Dan Fodio. There's going to be some amazing work coming out on that soon by Oludamini Ogunaki at University of Virginia. There's also Hassan Dem, the Fulani disciple of Shaykh Ibrahim Niasse, that wrote extensively on this too. Shaykh Ibrahim Niasse himself, I just was reading his Sir al-Akbar, which is this kind of manuscript version, which he talks a lot about these things. And in the fiqh tradition, it's true that there are, basic commentaries. But just keep in mind, people write about things when they need to. So there is very interesting literature, fatwa literature in Senegal about when is zakat required on colonial cash crops, right? If it's being imposed upon you, do you have to pay zakat? And of course, there's lengthy, and it's good evidence to suggest that the West African fatwas on smoking were the ones actually that influenced later perceptions of the illegality of smoking tobacco that later became pronounced in North Africa and the Middle East. So there's a very vibrant fatwa tradition on that one, lengthy expositions. This very interesting debate upon alternative narrations for Qabd versus Sadl. In the Maliki school, that's a very vibrant discussion. Whether whatever side you want to be on, I mean, you have to admit that that's an amazing discussion. Right. It's some of the first from Muhammad Hayat al-Sindi, who is making the same argument from within the Hanafi school in Medina Munawwara, who is allegedly the teacher of Muhammad Wahab. He's a Naqshbandi Sufi. I wrote about him too. Whether it's Muhammad al-Sanusi, the founder of the Sanusiya Tariqah, or Shaykh Ibrahim Niasse, there's a shared understanding, like there's debates going back and forth. And what's so interesting, as you know, about the recorded scholarly debates in textual form is that they're picking up something that somebody said 200 years ago from across the Muslim world, and then saying, "Oh, and this is why it's still appropriate for me to comment on it, and this is what I have to say." So there's that. There's also, I think, the very interesting tradition of like ilm al-huruf, which I think is separate than Sufism, but kind of Islamic esotericism. And we're talking about, a book that's written in, the Jawahir al-Khams, the book of 5 jewels by Muhammad Ghawth, written in the 16th century in India. This book is now commented on in North Africa and in West Africa. And if you actually want to buy the book today, you can really only find it in printed form in North and West Africa, although in Egypt you can get it too. So anyway, so there's there's this running commentary about what are the significance of the Arabic letters. What are the angelic presences that are attached to the Arabic letters? How are they connected to the mansions of the moon? I mean, this is, I mean, I'm not really an expert in this field, but I recognize that it's a fascinating discussion, right?
Right, right.
So there's lots of, and that of course blends with traditional astronomy also, because it's talking about the position of the stars, etc. So, and then there's mathematical texts about the calculation of zakat and inheritance. So there's a wealth of
MashaAllah.
things that are in West Africa, that are still to be properly understood. I mean, and I would say just a minute portion of this has been translated.
Yeah, mashallah, tabarakallah. Yeah, thank you for that. That really was informative. Really kind of gives us kind of a greater help us understand there's a greater breadth to the African tradition of scholarship. So
yeah, there's also work on Kashnawi, who comes around he's of the 18th century, and he's from the kind of Lake Chad area, and he's one of the he teaches a lot of Egyptians when he gets to Egypt. But he's a specialist, besides in the esoteric sciences, he's a specialist in mantiq and in logic and in theology, and he is plugged into a tradition in Central Sudanic Africa of specialization in this science that people have written about. So there'll be some work coming out of Columbia University by a PhD student on that topic. So,
inshallah. Allah preserve you. Allah preserve you. Mashallah. You've done quite a bit. So much. Mashallah. Yeah. I wanted to just shift a little bit to politics. I mean, you have any thoughts about what's happening in American politics today? Recently, we saw the election of Mamdani in New York. Of course, we see a lot of things that are going on with Trump and the Somalis and things like that. Then just in basic the ideas of identity politics overall. Because one thing that I come across. Even with some of my students as they tuna, particularly some of like the younger sisters, this question of like representation, this kind of obsession with the desire to see people represented, in high office and in powerful positions, and it's like, well, why are there not this many black people, or which often I'll say, but why are there not Chinese people there either, or why are there, because you can always we start talking about representation, it's like, well, there's a lot of groups of people, different races of people you could talk about who are also been excluded, but they're not making a big deal out of it, but at any rate, that Muslims, of course, a lot of Muslims are happy to see a Muslim, or at least someone who actually identifies with the Muslim community, to take public office. But overall, I mean, just the state of America, state of politics, the state of, I guess, the public morality. Have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do recognize that, fundamentally, you can't really change a conversation until you change the people around the table. That's what my thesis advisor, Rudolph Ware, used to tell me. So but of course, that doesn't always, you can have a white supremacist and black skin also. And I think whether we're Muslims on the right or the left, I think we share an understanding going forward that Muslims, we have to articulate our own path. We have to stand up for our own truth. But at the same time, I think I think it is appropriate to take the words of Malcolm X when he was saying towards the end of his life, like, I will work with anybody who is committed to alleviating the miserable condition that we find ourselves in, right? So I don't see a problem with making alliances for people who have shared some of the shared understandings of justice and standing up for justice that we have. But otherwise, I'm mostly sort of following the tradition of my West African sheikhs, which is to kind of stay out of politics. Think about politics as just inherently corrupting. That the best of kings is the ones that frequent scholars, and the worst of scholars is the one that frequents kings.
Yes, exactly. That's our wisdom, the wisdom from our tradition. Yeah, totally. It's definitely become like a very difficult issue, like for the Western Western Muslim community, just because at one point, remember, we weren't involved in politics. A lot of people were saying, to be involved in politics is haram. And then all of a sudden there was a shift, hey, well, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, You know,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm gonna
So
say
there's.
I do think it's important to be part of the
Yeah.
conversation.
Mhm,
But I remember there's an interesting vignette of
mhm,
Sheikh Ibrahim Niass when he
mhm,
goes to Ghana,
mhm,
and he's friends with Kwame
mhm,
Nkrumah, the
mhm,
prominent Ghanaian
mhm,
Pan-Africanist. And Marshall
mhm,
Tito comes there, who's
mhm,
the president of Yugoslavia, is kind of like
mhm,
a socialist, but kind of
mhm,
non-aligned.
mhm,
And so there, Sheikh Ibrahim Niass is asked to articulate what's his political vision, and he
mhm,
essentially says, "Well, I think of the world as one village in which
mhm,
we are all living in our own huts, but we come to the center of the village. This is a time of mashawara, mutual consultation, and we decide what is the mutual benefit to us as a village.
mhm.
But then we all go raise our own children in our own huts the way we know."
Yeah,
So,
right, right, yeah, yeah.
uh, yeah, so I do think that whatever the perspective, I know things
Mhm,
are polarized in many communities right now, but
mhm,
whatever the perspective, I think there is so much things
mhm.
that we share.
Yeah, 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 totally.
Yeah.
I think that probably one of the biggest challenges for Muslims is just trying to overcome anti-intellectualism. And what I mean by
Mhm.
that is, there's a tendency of there's a lot of pressure to actually embrace one particular way of doing something, especially in the area of like politics. We're especially on the subject of politics, and if you're not doing it that way, if you're not saying the things that people want you to say, then you're just blacklisted. Conversation is shut down. The Muslim public is not given the opportunity to actually hear different perspectives about, of course, the bigger picture of things, and I think that there's a major failure on the part of our leaders to help our community to mature and have those mature conversations, right? To exemplify, what a mature debate looks like publicly, and that you can differ with someone and remain brothers and sisters in the process, right? So,
Mhm.
which sort of brings me to ask this other question of like, what do you think the major challenges or challenge that Muslims have today? Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess the segment into answering that. I don't know if you remember,
Mm.
we had a funny interchange on during the COVID times. I don't know if you remember
Oh,
that.
okay, right. Huh? Yeah,
You
huh?
were saying certain things about the vaccine at one point, and I disagreed with you.
Yeah,
And then I
okay.
sort of caught myself because I was disagreeing with you publicly, and then I wrote to you, said, "I haven't talked to you in a long time. I can't. Please forgive me if this is let me greet you
Yeah,
properly."
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
of course, then I also
Mhm,
come to see a lot of the wisdom of your
mhm,
perspective over
mhm,
time too,
mhm, mhm.
largely through my own wife, who's was very much on articulating the
Yeah,
same
sure.
perspective.
Alhamdulillah.
But yeah, I think that the major challenge that we're facing as a community, um, well, it's connected. I think we're in a time right now where the nafs, the human ego, is being poked and prodded and stimulated in ways that we've never really seen before. And those of us
Mhm,
who are trying to raise children in this world with the social
mhm,
media, and like
mhm,
it's crazy. Like there are things that we're dealing with right now, like algorithms that are targeting you specifically. What will make you lust? What will make you hungry? What will make you right?
mhm,
So our nafs is being assaulted in this time. And remember, Sheikh Ahmad Tijani in the late
mhm,
18th century, he said, this is the time when the nafs, the human egos, have become thick and unruly, and they're
mhm,
not disciplined by forms of spiritual training that they were disciplined by before.
mhm.
So if he was saying that, then what about now? Like,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he's saying that the only path forward is through shukr, through gratitude
Mm.
to Allah. And so I
Yes,
think
yes.
that's something that
Mm,
we come back to. But what's also the rearing up of the ugliness of the
mhm,
self in communal relations
mhm,
manifests through the lack of husnul zan, right? The lack of thinking good of each other, making excuses for
mhm,
each other, and generally having mercy
mhm,
for each other. And I think, it's
mhm,
just reminded of a speech of Sheikh Hassan Sisi, who he would always, and this was interesting about the Tijani scholars, when they would speak, they would never speak about the Tariqah. They would speak about Islam, akhlaq and stuff. But anyway, so he was saying that the importance of the brotherhood and of community relations within Islam is more important than salat and then zikr, because you can make up the salat if you miss it. You can make up the zikr if you miss it. But if you miss a chance to make good relations with your brother, you may not ever have that chance again.
Right.
And what it means to be a good brother to some, all of the Muslim, when I became Muslim, Sheikh Hassan made me promise, that all of the Muslims are one family. If you can't benefit them, then at least avoid harming them, right?
Yes, right.
And of course, the insight that all of the creation is God's family, and the most beloved to God are the ones who are the most useful to His creation.
Yes,
so
right.
that means helping them. That means speaking good of them behind their back. That means giving money. That means visiting them when they're sick. That means clothing them when they need clothes, feeding them when they need food. And these are things that it's hard to do, right? It's hard to get over your own purview of what concerns your own self and think about the welfare of others.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. We all have that challenge.
Generally, we're just like sort of a self-centered. The world has kind of made us into this self-centered islands that is really problematic, I think, from a spiritual perspective within the Islamic community.
Right, mashallah. Well, Dr. Zachary, it's really been a pleasure. It's mashallah, you've done a lot of work, and hopefully I can get caught up with a lot of your writings, and so you have a number of books, number of articles. How can someone keep up with your work?
Oh, well, I know I'm not a public figure like you. I appreciate the people that do that. I don't have the constitution for that, but I'm always happy if you want to email me or contact me. I'll answer questions or learn from you, anybody else. But
but do you have a website where your books are being sold or anything like that, or your articles can be read, or just people just have to do searches like I did?
No, I may have some articles on academia.edu. I've put some of the findings from one of the books into the website, tijani.org, but it needs updating. But yeah, so no, I'm more interested in the person-to-person connection. So
well, alhamdulillah. Allah bless you. Allah bless you. Well, Dr. Zachary Wright, really, it's been an honor and pleasure, and hopefully we'll meet again in Qatar or somewhere else.
I would love that
sometime soon. Allahumma alaikum, inshallah.
All right, Habib. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Wa alaikum salam. Okay.
Subscribe to Lamppost Education Initiative on YouTube and Spotify.